All right, we're going to start the webinar now. I know that there'll be some others joining us as we go, but we'll get into it underway on time. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us here today for Dialog's third Thought Leadership webinar. And today's topic is around data governance. We have Dr. Jon Gray from Catapult BI, which is one of the Dialog Group companies with us today, and he's going to be speaking on this topic. And my name's Glenn Irvine. I'm the Head of Cloud and Emerging Technologies at Dialog Information Technology, and I'll be hosting it and tackling the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. So we'll have Jon speaking to us throughout, but if you can hold your questions to the end and perhaps type them as you think of them. There's a little Q&A capability at the bottom of the Zoom webinar. So you can start posting your questions at any time. You can put them in there. I'll start to bring them together, and then I'll ask them of Jon as we hit the end of the presentation. We'll just start off with a very quick introduction as to who Dialog Information Technology and the Dialog Group of companies is. We are one of the largest privately owned IT services companies in Australia, with over 1,000 consultants, and have been operating for over 40 years. Providing strategic consulting, full life cycle application development, managed application services, as well as a group of subsidiary companies, one of which we have here today, obviously, with Catapult BI, which provides business intelligence solutions. We also have ICE Media that does a web design and development, and Access HQ, which does assurance and testing. We do have a number of strong vendor partners right across the major cloud vendors, into some of the more traditional ones as well, but a lot of solid vendor support comes with Dialog. Likewise, some great client partnerships over the years, some of which have spanned decades. And as you can see just from the quick little brag screen there, that encompasses organisations both in the corporate and in the public sector. And we have very strong relationships with these customers. There's our quick contact details. We'll throw them up again at the end of the presentation while we're doing the Q&A. But I'd like to, at this stage, throw over to Dr. Jon Gray. He is the CEO of Catapult BI, and we'll be presenting today on data governance. Over to you, Jon.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. I'll just bring up my screen so we've got it to see. There we go. Okay, is that coming through okay?
That's perfect.
Okay, well, welcome everybody, and thanks for the introduction, Glenn. So what we're going to talk today is around the topic of data governance. Perhaps a little bit of a provocative title there: risk compliance, data governance, can you afford $1 billion fine? Sometimes consequences of getting it wrong can be very, very serious. The material I'm going to present today is not particularly technical. What I want to try and do is to convey the core concepts and how you go about doing data governance in a practical way in your organization. So let's have a look. Me, so I'm the CEO, Chief Data Scientist of Catapult BI, which is, if you like, the data management, the specialist service brand for data management in the Dialog Group. And we work closely with our other brands within the group. Very broad client base, quite a lot of work in federal and state government, but in other sectors as well, utilities, transport, logistics. And also we partner with a lot of organizations, software vendors, and industry associations that have an interest in data management. I've just given a selection of a few of them here. So in terms of the content today, first of all, I'm a sort of a small diversion, but an important one to emphasize a point. It's about predicting the future and the problem with getting there. At a high level, what is data governance? And then I'll talk about creating a data governance framework and implementing that in your organization. We'll also talk about some of the key enablers of implementing data governance around data stewardship, data literacy and metadata, and a few comments at the end in terms of that implementation journey. How do you get going, and the importance of not giving up. So first of all, The future and the problem with getting there. Oh, some decades ago when I was a young lad, I looked forward to the future and the colonization of the solar system. I thought we'd have cities on the moon by 2020 and we'd be colonizing the solar system. It hasn't happened, okay? Now, the problem with space travel and colonizing the planets is quite an interesting one because it's not a problem of science engineering. The science and engineering has been ready to go for some decades. Yes, it's a bit better now. We've got better computers and stuff, but the fundamental engineering and science problems have been solved a long time ago. So why isn't the moon being populated? Well, you need to get the economic fundamentals right before it takes off. It costs an awful lot of money. Who's going to make profit out of it? Those economic fundamentals are the reason why it's not a problem with science and engineering. Now, as an analogy, in the data world, lots of people have been dreaming about that future promise of the AI-powered, data-driven, analytics-inspired insights, optimization of business processes. Now, we haven't quite got there yet, but in a similar way to space travel, the problem with this journey to the future state, it's similar. The science, the engineering, the computer science, information systems, theory, all of that stuff has been ready to go for decades. So why haven't we got there? Well, I suggest one of the key reasons why we haven't got there is you need to get the data management fundamentals right before you can go on this journey. Okay, it's not a problem. We've got enough science, we've got enough technology, we've solved most of the hard engineering problems around data management, but you've got to get those data management fundamentals right. Now, what are they? Well, data governance, along with things like metadata, data quality, master and reference data, these fundamentals are the things that you need to get right. And the one that we're going to focus on today is data governance, because if you don't have data governance and those other fundamental practices well embedded and implemented in your organization, that journey to the future is not going to happen. Okay. So the importance of fundamentals. One of those fundamental practices is data governance, but what is it? It's actually quite simple, really. It's essentially a collection of rules for managing data properly. In the guidebook called Dharma Diembok, it says it's the exercise of authority, control, planning, monitoring over the management of data assets. It basically means you've got to have some rules for managing data properly. Now, the analogy I use here is with rules of the road. Okay, if you're going to go out in your car or your motorbike and drive around, you've got to have rules of the road. Do you drive on the left or the right? When you come to a roundabout, which way do you go? You come to a junction, who gives way? All right. Now, those rules of the road are vitally important because if we don't have them, we're going to have accidents all over the place. And a similar sort of thing happens in data management. You've got to have those rules about what you can and cannot do with data. Who can access it? When can you access it? What can you do with it? If you don't have those rules, it's very easy for often accidental mistakes to happen. Someone might download something, put it on a USB stick, goes in the pocket, they lose it on the bus on the way home. Before you know it, a data breach has happened. You're in the news, it's not good, okay? So it's in its simplest sense, it's all about establishing and communicating the rules about what you can and cannot do with data and who can use it for what purposes, okay? And as I said, if you get it wrong, things like a data breach can be very, very significant. They can have huge damage to your business. Another reason is that once you've got those rules in place, then you can start to develop and manage improvement projects. You want to get into data quality. You want to have better quality data. You want to have an analytics and reporting platform. Well, you can start to build that. Okay. You want those insights. Well, you can start to get them, but you've got to get those basic fundamental practices in place in order that you can start to do that improvement. So look, we've all seen in the news, these are some examples of the effects of poor data governance or lack of data governance, data breaches, fines from regulators. You know, we've had examples in Australia. Some of you probably remember Commonwealth Bank and Austrac, the the large fine that they ended up paying, or out of court settlement. These things are real. They happen all the time. And, you know, look, if you're a very, very large, massive bank, you can perhaps afford $1 billion fine. But if you're a very small to medium-sized business, you can't. These sorts of things could put you out of business if you get it wrong. Now, what I want to also emphasize here, again, using that analogy of roads and travel, is data governance and data strategy. They're not the same, but they are closely related. As I've mentioned, data governance, it's rules for managing data properly. If you like, it's the rules of the road, the highway code. It's you know, what do you have to do to drive safely, irrespective of where you're going, okay? Now, data strategy is about the journey and the destination. Where do you actually want to get to? And to get there, you need maps and GPS and compasses and stuff like that. But wherever you're going, you still have to follow the rules of the road. So data governance won't tell you where to go. That's your strategy. But once you've got your strategy, you need to understand what the rules of the road are. Otherwise, you'd like to have an accident and not get there. Now, in terms of advice and help, there's good stuff out there already in terms of what is data governance and how to do it. At Catapult, we use something called DARMA, which is the Professional Society for Data Management. And in the guidebook called the DMBOK, there's this thing called the wheel. And this, at a high level, shows you what some of these fundamental practices of data management are all about. And sitting there right in the center of that wheel is data governance, okay? It pervades everything you do. And if you don't have those rules of the road in your data governance, everything you try to do in warehousing, in data interoperability, content management, security, all of those things are in jeopardy if you don't have that governance defined and functioning right at the beginning. So the nice thing about DARMA DMBOK is it contains a lot of what you already need to know. Now, every organization's going to have their own flavor of data governance. They're going to have their own framework and implementation in their organization. But, you know, data governance, it's pretty much the same from one organization to another. And we use DMBOK as a good starting point, and we have what we called a templated approach to creating a bespoke framework and implementation for a client. Now, the good thing about this is, as I said, DMBOK, it's got a lot of content already there, and it's just a question of tailoring that content, adding to it, enriching it to produce something that's unique to your bank, your government agency, your logistics business, your retailer, whatever you are. We can start with this and start with a template and then tailor that template to your specific circumstances. So this diagram here shows that process at a high level. So we take the guidance that's already there, those basic rules of data governance in the DMBOK, and for many organizations, that's maybe 60 to 80% of what you need. From that, we can then start to build a unique data governance framework for your business, and that's going to be shaped by the business drivers, the kind of risks you want to manage, the kind of business are you in a heavily regulated industry? Do you have international competition? Do you have lots and lots of suppliers? There's all different facets of your business that are going to subtly tailor your framework. Also, which jurisdiction or jurisdictions do you operate in? Is it just in New South Wales? Is it all over Australia? Is it internationally? So all of these factors are going to contribute to coming up with something that's unique and special to yourself. It's going to be your own version of data governance. Now, once we've started this, what we also do next is we have a look at the current practice of data or data management in your organizations. So most organizations have been doing data stuff for years, sometimes many, many decades. So what we do is we have a look at your current practice. Where do you store data? What sort of databases? What sort of systems? What sort of policies have you written? What sort of guidelines do you have? What sort of capabilities do you have in your team? How much data do you have? How much do you need? We do what we call a current state assessment of your current data practice. That will then inform how we're going to implement data governance in your organization. So we've done that current state. We've now got a framework, a broad framework, and we've got an implementation guide and support so that we can now go ahead and start to create data governance and implement it in your organization. And as part of that implementation, we're going to have a plan. There's going to be a whole bunch of new activities and practices that we're going to have to introduce. We're going to need some change management. But you know, it's generally not heavy. It's data governance. It can be quite light touch. You know, these are generally quite modest size improvement programs implementing and bringing in data governance. Once we have that data governance implemented, people know what they're doing, then it's a good foundation for those improving your data quality, you know, start to enhance your reporting, all of the outcomes that you're seeking. Okay, you can get there once you've got this foundational practice implemented and bedded down. So what does this framework look like? So what I've got here is a sort of typical contents page from a data governance framework. It's typically a document. It talks about the strategy, the timelines, your ecosystem, why do you want data governance, what are the specific outcomes, and then we start to look at some of the regulations, the regulatory environment that your business operates in. What's the relevant policies? What's the relevant legislation? Who are the regulators that regulate your business? Because obviously you have to conform and comply with their practices and guidelines. So this is where we start. And then once we've done that, then we can start to look at specific roles and responsibilities in your organization. Start to build up a RASCI chart, start to dob people in. That's your job. You're accountable for this. You're responsible for that. We can identify what are the governing bodies. We can start to build out a stewardship program. We can look at things like data literacy. We can start to flesh out what's required for your business in terms of privacy, security controls, and so on. And at some point in time, we're going to get down to start writing some concrete procedures and work instructions that people on the ground in BAU can follow. Often those are just adjustments or improvements or changes to existing policy. As I say, most people are already doing quite a lot of data stuff in their organization, and it's just a question of taking those existing BAU procedures and work instructions and fine-tuning them to make sure that they conform to the overall framework of data governance in your organization. Now, in terms of roles and responsibilities, there's probably a couple of key success factors that we've found are going to work in implementing good data governance in your organization. One of them is, in our opinion, to have a chief data officer who is overall accountable and responsible for making data governance happen. Okay, now that chief data officer, ideally, in our opinion, should be at the highest tier of the business, alongside your chief financial officer, your chief operating officer, and so on. At that level is ideally where we want to see a CDO operating and have the confidence and support of his or her peers at that level. The other recommendation is that chief data officer who's going to be promoting and implementing data governance ideally should be on the business side of the house rather than the corporate side. Often we find this sort of role is somewhere deep down in the bowels of the IT shop somewhere. Not, in our opinion, the best place to be. We'd prefer something that looks a bit like this, with a CDO over on the business side of the house, side by side with a COO. And in the business side of the house, in various divisions, we would have data stewards that have some sort of reporting line into the CDO. These are some of the conditions that we would like to see in order to make sure that data governance is going to be implemented well and effective. The other thing that we want to see is what we call a RASCI chart, which shows the accountabilities, responsibilities, and what we've got along here at the top are the main data functions and data governance functions, who's approving stuff, who's in the steering committee, who's the data stewards, who's responsible for data literacy. And we've got a whole bunch of roles. So in terms of the CXOs, who's responsible for that, in terms of divisional heads and so on. This is a very, very simple one here. In reality, it would be a little bit bigger. We'd have more functions and more roles, but it's just to give you a flavor of what that RASCI looks like. And these are two very, very important foundational pieces. If you don't have that clear accountabilities and responsibilities, it's going to be very, very difficult to implement and maintain effective data governance. Moving down in terms of what else we need, and this is sort of where the rubber hits the road, we need to have some key enablers to actually take that framework, to take the policies, the guidelines, the procedures, the work instructions, familiar with the rules of their organization. We need data stewards to basically promulgate data governance. These are the people who are going to be seen as the authorities within their business area, within their group, within their division, who know stuff about data and know data governance. These are the go-to people, and they have a key role in promulgating good practice in data management and good data governance. For stewards, you're typically going to have one or more of these, but they need to be right across all the different areas of the organization, your sales and your corporate, your shipping, finance, however your organization is structured. Each of those business areas needs to have one or more data stewards who are basically the custodians, the go-to people. They're the people that basically promulgate good practice, and you need to equip them with, a steward's handbook. So this has got nice, easy to follow instructions. It's got the org chart, the RASCIs, it identifies the policies, but it's also clearly explaining what are the procedures, the work instructions, what tools do we use in nice, practical, simple ways, so that stewards can ensure that amongst their branch or the division, good data governance is occurring. Now, in terms of the journey and getting there, data governance, like many data management practices, in my opinion, should be deployed incrementally. Okay, we need to start at the top with our framework and our implementation guide. But in terms of stewardship, for instance, it can take several months or even years to get all the stewards that you've identified in your organization trained and up to speed with the right practice. Okay, and often it's easier to start in one area of the organization, start with some core information holdings in a particular division, get that steward or stewards trained, get that data governance happening, and then start to bring it out across the organization. Look, if you have a huge budget, you might be able to race this out very, very quickly. But in reality, most organizations have a tight budget. You've got to train stewards slowly, incrementally, and start to build it out. So, don't be too disheartened if you can't roll this out across your entire agency in a few weeks. It might take some months to basically roll it out, okay? But the important thing is those stewards are trained, they understand the framework, and they know what to do, okay? So, as I said, this slide here is just saying what I just said in the previous picture, okay? The advantage of data governance, unlike some of the other practices, is it can be done in a relatively light touch, lightweight way. Often implementation is all about adjusting current practice. Most organizations already do data stuff, okay? And it's just a question of adjusting, fine-tuning some of those work instructions in BAU, taking an incremental approach, making sure that stewards are trained and committed and motivated, and everybody knows who the stewards are. All of this thing needs to be done. It's not particularly complex. It just has to be done in an orderly way. Okay, and obviously, you're not alone. Everybody needs to do the data management fundamentals if they want to get the benefits of those AI-driven insights from their lakes and warehouses and integration platforms and all the other wonderful things that people want to implement. You've got to get those fundamentals. Data governance is one of those. But, if you need help, if you need guidance, we're here and we can help you on that journey. So that's what I wanted to cover today. It was really explaining what are the key concepts, explain to you it's not a scary, frightening, horrendously technical subject, but hopefully now you're equipped with some knowledge, and we've explained to you a simple templated approach to creating data governance in your organization. So now at this point, I'll hand back over to Glenn, who's been taking the questions as the Zoom presentation runs, and Glenn will give those presentations to me.
Okay. So thanks very much, John. Basically, we've got John's contact details up there on the screen for you as well at this stage. I do have one question so far, but feel free to quickly get them in if you want John to answer anything at this stage. We'll tackle the first one. It's from Christian. And the question is, your framework does not include the boards, as in the governing boards of an organisation. What role do they have?
Yes, well, they are there. So what you need to be able to do is to identify exactly what those boards are. Typically, you're going to have 2 or 3 levels. You're going to have the most senior at the executive level, maybe a divisional one, and then something at a more operational level. Depends on the size and scale of your organization. The lower governing body is going to do some of the more mundane and routine tasks. So we've got a de-identified data set that we want to hand over to share it with another agency. Can you confirm that all the right practices and tests and assurances have been done before we hand it over? At the highest level, some of the things you'd be looking at would be to endorse, for instance, the data governance framework, or if there is a new organizational wide policy, that's something that will go up to the highest level. Probably 2 tiers is probably enough. Maybe if you're a very, very large organization, 3 tiers might be required. But yes, those do need to go in there and align with the RASCI. Yeah.
All right, I got another one from Christian. That is about the data stewards. Other than compliance, what's the value add?
So the value add is often sort of literacy. So data literacy, in our opinion, is a common problem. A lot of people have quite poor levels of literacy. They often don't know they've got poor levels. They don't know where data comes from, what it's made out of. Some of the vocabulary around things like what's an asset register, what's an asset, what's metadata, what's a registry, some of these concepts around data management are often not well understood, and a key role for stewards, in addition to compliance and data governance, is also to educate and promulgate knowledge about data management more generally. And that's actually a very, very important role. But key thing is, it's not just lecturing at them, it's also working side by sides in BAU with their colleagues and actually doing this as a job, okay? So that sort of educational uplift role and being seen as the go-to person. Oh, I don't really understand what I'm doing here with this data quality. I'll go and talk to the steward and they can tell me what it is that I'm supposed to be doing. And if the steward needs extra help, then they need to understand the limitation of their skills, and they might go off to the CDO office or the Center of Excellence or the Data Hub to go and find somebody who's a bit more specialized and can help out. Yeah, so they're a sort of conduit and educator, and that's a key part of their role.
Another quick follow on that around data stewards is, and Christian's asking, how are data stewards KPI'd?
Oh, that's a good question. Look, I think given the broad role, the broad set of duties that they have, some of those KPIs are a bit tricky. So given that I've said one of their roles is to educate and to promulgate good practice, you'd probably need some metric around that, but it's not an easy one. I guess from a compliance perspective, a good metric would be if you have an unfortunate track record of data breaches. How are you now trending now that you've deployed data governance and data stewards? How are you trending on your data breaches? Are you getting fewer of them? So there's a range of different metrics you can have, because there's a range of different duties and responsibilities that stewards are associated with.
Okay, we've got a question from Eric, which is how to justify the ROI to keep the funding for a data governance program.
So look, for many organizations, there's often the big episode. So it was Austrac capturing them, laundering money, and there's a $800 million fine. There's an episode. And most organizations, if it's not of that scale, have similar kind of episodes that often you can trace back to just poor data literacy, poor data governance. And if people were understood the rules and were following them, that incident probably wouldn't have happened. Okay, you can't guarantee that it wouldn't happen, but you can be confident that the likelihood of that incident occurring will be reduced. And when you see reports of fines for laundering money of that scale, and you might spend hundreds of thousands or small millions on implementing data governance, that's probably a good return on investment. In the worst case scenario, if your data governance practice is very bad, you're audited by a regulatory body, your license to operate could be removed. In the worst case, you just go out of business. Okay, so the modest spend on the data management fundamentals like data governance is a no-brainer for most organizations. It should be. Okay.
Lawrence is asking, from a regulatory compliance perspective, should he also involve someone from the risk department for the data governance discussion?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So often, your risk department, there's people, obviously they know risk, but they may not be data experts. But yes, in terms of producing your framework and then implementing your data governance framework, yes, you do need a range of stakeholders to be consulted and involved. Obviously, things like what are the relevant policies? Who are your regulators? What's the relationship? How does the relationship with the regulator work? So typically, there's quite a few people in your corporate division, in your legal, in your finance, in your risk management and compliance area that you need to consult with to make sure that your framework is actually meeting all the requirements of those different areas.
Right, one from Peter is the CDO, and in this case, I'm assuming a chief data officer, a new concept? You'd not heard of this before, other than in some default uses in organizations.
So look, the chief data officer concept has been around for some years. It probably came to prominence 5, 6, 7 years ago. I think at some point Gartner started to promote it, and of course that's often a trigger for people to think about this and consider doing something about it. So it's not an entirely brand new idea. I think part of the difficulty with a chief data officer is what's the separation of accountabilities and responsibilities between a chief data officer and a chief information officer. I think part of the problem is, data information. These words have many similar and interchangeable meanings, but essentially, I think the key role of the chief data officer is as a sort of from the business side of the house as a custodian of valuable data that's used in our business. Our business needs this data in order to work and do its job every day. How do we protect, manage, and exploit that data from a business perspective? Okay, now this is quite a different concept to, say, a typical CIO, which is, our computing platforms and our software, what are we doing about making sure we've got enough compute and making sure our licenses are up to date and we've got enough developers to write more software? Those are very, very different concerns to the nurturance, the cultivation of data as a business asset that makes our business work better. So that there are, I think, two clear separations of concern. We have seen in recent years many large organizations, large government agencies, large private sectors organizations create a CDO role. Where in the org chart they sit varies quite a lot. So occasionally we'll see a CDO at the CXO level, at the very senior level, but more typically a CDO position is sort of in the IT area and often subordinate to the CIO. So it's quite a common. We work with lots of them around Australia and internationally. It's a common concept.
Okay, Marty is asking, what are some of the common challenges you face when implementing data governance for organizations?
So look, I think probably the first one is a general problem around data literacy. Now, it might sound odd given that organizations have been doing data stuff for decades, But it's very easy for people to get lulled into a false sense of understanding. They think because they've got a smartphone, they buy stuff on eBay, they download Netflix, they use the internet all the time. Well, yep, I kind of understand data. Well, no, you don't. Just, if that's your experience of data, you know nothing. All right. And it's the trick is to make people literate without sort of, preaching to them or being condescending, but that there are some fundamental concepts about what is data, where does it come from, what's it made out of, how do you look after it, does it go off, how do you make things out of it, how do you protect it, what's sensitive. There's a whole raft of concepts that aren't particularly difficult, but people just don't have, or they have a very sort of loose, wibbly wobbly understanding of what they are. And this then manifests itself in organizations where someone will say, oh yes, yeah, I think we should have a data asset register. Oh, that's good. How many have we got? Ooh, I reckon we've got about 100. No, I reckon we've got about 1 million. Ooh, hang on. Are we talking about the same thing? And this I think is an underlying inhibitor to doing anything, whether it's data governance, data quality, metadata management, data modeling, data architecture. You need to get over this hump of data literacy and get everybody speaking the same language. And I think that's one of the problems. In terms of convincing people of the value, look, as I said, most organizations have got one or more big incidents where they nearly went out of business or the regulator nearly shut them down. At the board level, people understand the consequences of bad data practice, even if they don't have that sort of data literacy skill. They kind of understand the consequences of when bad things happen due to bad data practice. Yeah, we don't want to get shut down again. We don't want that audit. We don't want those people coming in. We can't afford another fine. Yeah.
Okay, we've got another one from Christian, which is, are there any successful examples of companies that have integrated data governance successfully into their risk management framework?
Yeah, look, I think we work with a number of clients that have deployed data governance along the lines we've described. Obviously, there is a lot more detail to it. I've just given a high-level overview. As I said, I think two of the concerns are, where you have a CDO and a CIO, or sometimes it's a chief digital or a chief information, where you've got this separation between the techie stuff and the data stuff, that there can be friction, tension, confusion about responsibilities between those roles. And as I said, the data literacy can be a bit of an inhibitor. The other thing, of course, is governance can in itself be a scary word. It's a bit like compliance and audits and stuff like that. Oh, it's a bit scary. It's all about turning it from something scary into just something mundane and obvious, like the rules of the road. Do we drive on the right or the left? Come to a roundabout, which way do we go round? It's not scary. You're not being policed or surveilled. It's just, these are just sensible rules of the road. If we don't follow those rules, we just have accidents. So it's all about trying to make it unscary, simple, plain, obvious, practical, and mundane. Okay, but it's still important. Mustn't forget that if you don't do it right, bad things can happen. But also all those improvements that people are looking forward to. Oh, when are we going to get that AI-driven insight platform that's going to give us insights that makes our business work better? Well, if you don't get data governance in place, and if you don't get metadata, and if you don't get those fundamentals of data management in place, you'll never get any insights out of that platform. It's all a waste of money. So, it's partly about stopping bad things from happening, but it's also enabling good things to happen as well. Okay, so it's about convincing people of the story. You don't want bad things to happen. You've kicked off this project, this new data integration insights platform. You're spending a lot of money. Let's make sure we get value for money. Let's make sure that that platform is built properly and delivers the right goods.
Okay, we might have one last question here, and it's from Matt, which is, in general, what level of understanding of data governance best practice do we observe with clients?
Yeah, I'm not sure what that question is. Could you
As
just
in,
maybe
what level
rephrase
of
that, Glenn?
understanding of data governance best
Oh,
practice?
what level of understanding? Look, in general, people are familiar with the words, the catchphrases. Oh yeah, data governance, I want some of that, it sounds good. But when you start to scratch below the surface, the understanding of what it means and what's involved in developing a framework and implementing it isn't really there. Okay, so I think no one would argue, oh, we don't need data governance, it's all good here, we don't need anything like that. No one would say that. They'd generally agree and say, yes, governance sounds like a good idea, we should have some of that. Oh, what do you think it means? Oh, yeah, not really sure. so I think there's generally no antipathy or little antipathy. People are, they see it as benign, it's a good thing to have. But in terms of what does it mean, and again, this comes to the literacy, people don't really know what it means. So because they don't know what it means, they don't do it or it doesn't happen. Okay. So as I said, we don't encounter resistance, we just encounter lack of understanding of what's involved. And once we get through that, oh, okay, so it's not rocket science then, it's quite easy, isn't it? Yes. Oh, well, why didn't we do it before? Okay, so a lot of what we'd have to do is sort of educational and just inform people. Yes, you believe it's a good thing, but what's involved? Let me explain what's involved. Oh, it's not that hard, is it? No, it's not. So why don't we get on with it? Oh, is it cost them a lot of money? No, it doesn't cost you a lot of money. Okay.
All right. Look, John, that looks like that's all of the questions today. And I'd like to thank all of the people who attended today. And I hope you gained something from this. Again, John's contact details are up there. They've been up there right through the Q&A session. So if you actually like to reach out and have a further conversation with John, please do. But thank you all again. I'd like to thank John for doing the presentation today. And thanks everyone for attending today. We'll let you get back to your work. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Cheers.